Hello, I hope you're doing well today. My name is Ian Green, and it's my pleasure to be here to create another tutorial for you. I'm a music teacher. I really enjoy creating tutorial videos, and also I have music available for streaming on two different artist profiles, Ian J. Green and also Music Dreams. Now, today we're going to be looking at Unit 7 of the Level 10 Harmony course as taught through the Royal Conservatory of Music. And we're going to be looking at Part 1, where we are going to be spelling the dominant 9th and dominant 13th chords. Now, as we know, in the different scales, major or minor, the dominant triad is always going to be starting on the 5th note of the scale. So let's say we're in the scale of A flat major, and we'll go over to the piano and I'll play that scale for you. The 5th note is E flat. Now, if we were to create a triad, a dominant triad of the scale of A flat major, it would be E flat, G, B flat, and D flat to create the dominant 7th. So the dominant triad is E flat, G, B flat, and then D flat is the minor 7th, or the 7th part of that scale, and the 7th part of that chord. So then we have a dominant 7th sound. Now that's really worked well for quite a while in music history. Composers used the dominant 7th triad and chord. They switched between the dominant triad and dominant 7th chord many times within their compositions, and also used that chord to pivot to other keys, also known as modulation, and also used that chord as a way to create secondary dominant chords, all of which are in other tutorials on this channel. Now, though, we're going to be building on this even further. What composers wanted to do, especially in the Romantic era and onwards, so from around the 1825, 1820s, etc., maybe a little bit earlier, all the way through until present day, composers wanted to expand the sound a little bit more beyond the dominant 7th chord. The dominant 7th chord had already been established for about 100 and some odd years prior, so composers thought, hey, how can I make things different? So what composers did was they created a 4-note chord, but they added an extra sound. They added the 9th. So let's say we're in the scale of A flat major, and we create that dominant triad again, E flat, G, and B flat. Now, we know, as we just confirmed, that the dominant 7th would also include a D flat. Now, if we were to add the 9th as well, it would be a major 9th above the root, which would be a major 9th above E flat. Then we would also add an F. So if I were to play all those notes together, it's a 5-note chord. But traditionally, especially in chorale writing, when we write with 4 parts, or also when we create different types of chords, usually composers would stack 4 notes on top of each other. So as a result, a note had to be omitted, and traditionally was omitted. So you can see how in this example 7.2 on page 116 of the textbook, there's a bracket around the B flat of this dominant chord. That is because when we use the dominant 9th, we would use the root, the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th as the 4 notes. So it creates a more full sound, a slightly different sound than the dominant 7th chord. And also, then it helps the composers to write a chord in 4 notes instead of 5. Sometimes in full orchestrations, the composer uses the full 5 notes, but usually in smaller ensemble writing and music for like solo piano and whatnot, that was usually the case, where we see the spelling root, 3rd, 7th, 9th. Now, something that's very interesting is there is also the dominant 13th chord. Now, you can see here there's a similarity between the two spellings. If we go back scrolling to the dominant 9th, root, 3rd, 7th, 9th. With the dominant 13th, it's root, 3rd, 7th, 13th. Now, the interesting thing here is that The reason for this is not only just to stack the notes and just because there's many notes in between the root of the chord all the way up to the 13th, which is literally almost 2 octaves away, almost. But also because the root and the 3rd and the 7th are the qualitative notes of the chord, which means they are the notes that create that sound. We need to have the root and the 3rd to create that major triad sound of the dominant triad of any major or minor key. And then the 7th also creates that very nice kind of distinct quality. Then when we add the 13th, or even or with inversions, there's different different combinations where you can play melodies and add those sounds. The dominant 13th creates a slight more of a dissonance between the notes, but it creates an interesting quality that especially composers like Chopin, Franz Liszt, Rachmaninoff, and other later composers as well, Debussy and Ravel and whatnot, really enjoyed using those chord sounds within the dominant 13th chord. So it's important to think about how those chords are similar in that the root, the 3rd, and the 7th have to be included. They should be strongly included because the quality of that chord is present in those notes. Now, if you add the 9th, then that's the extra note. If you add the 13th, then that's the other extra note. But what we never do is have a dominant 9th and 13th chord combined together. It's either one type or the other. They both also create the same function in the sense that you can create and use a dominant 13th or a dominant 9th chord in replacement of a dominant 7th at the end of a cadence. But use it sparingly. Usually these chords are coloring chords. They add a little bit of extra pizzazz or a little bit of extra color. But when used too much, they become not as special. So composers usually use the dominant 9th or dominant 13th chords just a few times to add a little bit of spice to their dish or a little bit of color to their composition. I do hope this tutorial and explanation was helpful, and I look forward to sharing another tutorial soon where we actually work through some of the examples in the book together and discover where those chords are hidden in some of the examples. Until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.